Hello, people. We at Quarantine Stories are back with our ninth episode. This time, we bring to you India's evergreen author from the hills, Ruskin Bond, who is equally popular with children and adults. Today, we will be presenting his story, The Night of the Millennium, from the collection When Darkness Falls, published by Penguin. The story will be read by Shreyashree Sarkar and Shalini Chakraborty, arrangements by Reeswav Chatterjee, editing by Shalini Chakraborty, soundscape and direction by Oritra Basu, and introducing the story is me, Gayatri Aij. So let's start.
Jackals howled dismally, foraging for bones and offal down in the khud below the butcher's shop. Pasand was unperturbed by the sound. A robust young computer whiz kid and a patriotic multinational, he prided himself on being above and beyond all superstitious fears of the unknown. In his lexicon, the unknown was just something that was waiting to be discovered. Hence, this walk past the old cemetery late at night. Midnight would see the new millennium in. The year 2000 beckoned, full of bright prospects for well-heeled young men like Pasand. True, there were millions, soon to be over 1 billion, sweating it out in the heat and dust of the plains below, scraping together a meager living for themselves and their sprawling families. Not for them the advantages of a public school education, 3 cars in the garage, and a bank account in Bermuda? Well, mused Pasand. Not everyone could have the brains and good luck, as well as the inherited family wealth, of course, that had made life so pleasant and so promising for him. This was going to be the century in which all these smart asses would get to the top, and all other varieties of asses would sink to the bottom. It was important to have a ruling elite, according to his philosophy. Only then could slaves prosper. He looked at his watch. It was just past midnight. He had eaten well, and he was enjoying his little walk along the lonely winding road which took him past the houses of the rich and the famous. The Lals, the Banerjees, the Kapoors and the Ramchandanis. He was as good as any of them. Better, in fact. He was approaching his own personal Everest while they had reached theirs and were on the downward slope. Or so he presumed. Here was the cemetery with its broken old tombstones, some of them dating from 150 years ago. Pathetic reminders of a once powerful empire, now reduced to dust and crumbling monuments. Here lay colonels and magistrates, merchants and memsahibs, and many small children, fragile lives which had been snuffed out in more turbulent times. To Pasant, they were losers. All of them. He had nothing but contempt for those who hadn't been able to hang on to their power and glory. No lost empires for him. The road here was very dark, for the trees grew thick on northern slopes. Pasant felt a twinge of nervousness, but he was reassured by the feel of the cell phone in his pocket. He could always summon his driver or his armed bodyguard to come and pick him up. The moon had risen over Nag Tibba, and the graves stood out in serried rows, as though forming a guard of honor for this modern knight in t-shirt and designer jeans. Through the deodars, he saw a faint light on the perimeter of the cemetery. Here, he had learned from one of his chamchas lived a widow with a brood of small children. Although in poor health, she was still young and comely, and known to lavish with her favors to those who were generous with their purses, for she needed the money for her hungry family. She was also a little mad, they said, and preferred to sleep in one of those old, domed tombs rather than in the quarters provided for her late husband, who had been the caretaker. This did not bother Pasant. He was in search of sensual pleasure, not romance. And right now, he felt an urgent need to exert his dominance over someone, preferably a woman, for he had to prove his manhood in some way. So far, most young women had shied away from his vainglorious and clumsy approach. But this woman wasn't young. She was in her late 30s, and poverty, malnutrition, and ill use had made her look much, much older. But there were vestiges of beauty in her smoldering eyes and sinewy limbs. Her gypsy blood must have had something to do with it. Her teeth gleamed in the darkness as she smiled at Pasant and invited him into her boudoir, the spacious tomb that she favored most. Pasant had no time for tender love play. Clumsily he clawed at her breasts, but found that they were not much larger than his own. He tore at her already tattered clothes and pressed his mouth hungrily to her dry lips. She made no attempt to resist. He had his way. Then, while he lay supine across the cold, damp slab of a grave that covered the remains of some long-dead warrior, she leaned over him and bit him on the cheek and neck. He cried out in pain and astonishment and tried to sit up, but a number of hands, small but strong, thrust him back against the tombstones. Small mouth, sharp teeth, pressed against his flesh. Muddy fingers tore at his clothes. Those young teeth bit and bit again. His screams mingled with the cries of the jackals. Patience, my children, patience. There is more than enough for all of you. They feasted on Basant. Down in the ravine, the jackals started howling again, awaiting their turn. The bones would be theirs. Only the cell phone, that would be rejected.
Hair God, Hair Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air.